industry experts who are going to be joining me in this conversation. To my left, I have Maxwell Kalu. He's the CEO and founder of African Warriors Fighting Championship. If you follow us on social media, you might have seen some of their videos where we have Dambe Warriors slugging it out. We have Debbie Larry Zamoje. She's the CEO of Brilla FM, the legendary sports platform in Nigeria. We have Janine Anthony, who is an industry expert and works for, I don't know if I'm allowed to go ahead. Yeah, she works for one of the biggest platforms, social media platforms in Africa. And we have Biola Kazim, who is the CEO of Sports Derivative. He's also a sports consultant and is very well versed in everything sports. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get right into it. Sports media in Africa. As a means of introduction, I'll just try and summarize what sports media actually means. To keep it simple, everything concerning media, but this time sports. Basically, that's what sports media is. So let's hear from our speakers, starting from just in the way they are seated. I'd like you to quickly give us an introduction of sports media, its impact in Nigeria, its impact in the sports industry as the mainstay as the lifeline or the mainstay of the industry, of the sports industry. Sports media as the lifeline of the sports industry. If you can just, how do you think sports media generally influences the sports industry, how it has and how it will continue to influence the sports industry?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Maxwell Kalu, founder, CEO of African Warriors Fighting Championship. To answer your question, I think sports media is the lifeblood of the sports industry. It drives engagement, interaction with sport. Us as an African sporting organization, we consider ourselves a sports media organization before anything else. So it very much defines what we do. And I think it defines much of the sports industry in the 21st century.
Thank you. Debbie?
Hi, everyone. So I work with Brilla Media, the home of Brilla FM. Now, Brilla FM is a 20-year-old company. And for me, when I think of sports media, I think of the 20 years that Brilla has existed, different generations, different timelines, putting at the forefront to people, telling stories. So it's storytelling. I don't think that we would enjoy sports in any aspect if the media is not at the forefront. So for me, it's just about telling stories and showcasing talents and different people in the sports industry.
Thank you. Janine?
Yes, and just to pick up from what she said, of how sports media has showcases talent, the excitement around sports. It's also meant that sport has now become lucrative just because sports media has diversified to ensure that the right story is out, the right sort of talent is out, and you're interested, and the big wigs are beginning to put money into that. So it's gone beyond now a hobby to an actual business. And for every industry, that is so important to thrive.
Thank you. Biola?
Hi, my name is Biola Kazim. So I think that for me, sports media, the intersection of sports and media basically is about the expansion of the spectacle. So you can say sports contests, football, basketball, whatever, they're all spectacles, right? And those who watch are spectators. Prior to media, people could only watch in fixed physical locations. But with media, you have expanded the ability of people to watch, and so you are recruiting spectators from all across, in some sense, the world. So basically, the essence of media in sports is to expand that spectacle, make it visible to more and more spectators. The media benefits, obviously, but also sports benefits, because when you're able to recruit more and more fans from all over the place, you can obviously sell and do a lot more things in that, across that. So that's the point. Sports is spectacle. What the media does is that it expands it and recruits more spectators from all over the place with no barriers these days.
Thank you. Very insightful. Taking it up from there, Biola, what opportunities do you see for entrepreneurs, practitioners in the sports media business?
I think that for young people, this is probably the best time, to be alive if you want to participate in sports and media. The confluence of emerging technologies and endless platforms means that there's so much that you can do if you're creative. I'll give you a very simple example. Up until about 5 years ago, sports photography in this country was probably non-existent. But obviously, with technology becoming more advanced, tools are cheaper, platforms are accessible. There's a young generation of young people who have taken it upon themselves to document sports stories with pictures all over Nigeria. And these guys are generating loads and loads of engagement and followership on social media. These were opportunities that simply did not exist. You can look at lots of podcasts coming up. There's YouTube, there are Facebook groups. There's so much that you can do. So the opportunities out there are endless. They're only limited by your imagination. Also, picking up the skills, that means that you can optimize those opportunities. Have never been easier. You can literally learn advanced skills on anything. Just having data and sitting in your house for 3 months, you can go from non-existent to intermediate level in terms of ability and skill to leverage on the opportunities available. The key point that I'll say is that up until a few years ago, sport was primarily served by traditional media, and traditional media by its nature is hefty. There are lots of investments, and so they are not as nimble and adaptable to changes as they should be. And I think that's where the opportunity lies, for young people, because the platforms that have served people for a long time are not as nimble, like I said, to take charge of this opportunity. That exactly is where the opportunity, exists for young people to, go in and begin to, serve the needs of an increasingly sophisticated audience, I would say. So the joke I make with my friends is, when people watch live EPL games or live UFC games or UFC fights, even the poorest person is exposed to the highest level of production. Like, if you want to watch movies, you literally have to go and pay like 5K to watch something that is of this level. But with sports, you just go to a viewing center, or some of them can't even speak English, but they are experiencing the highest level of production. What has happened is that the sports fan is probably even more sophisticated in terms of the expectation than literally any other category. And like I said, that growing sophistication, I think that traditional platforms are not nimble enough, they are not sharp enough to cater to it, and that's where the opportunity lies for young people.
Interesting. You mentioned emerging platforms like social media, so I'll take that to Janine, since she's quite vast in that field. How can sports organizations or sports platforms leverage on the opportunities that exist in these emerging platforms, these emerging social media platforms? Like, just this morning I was reading YouTube Shorts are grossing about 6 billion views daily, and this is on a daily basis. So emerging platforms like YouTube Shorts, like TikTok, and other similar platforms, how can sports organizations and sports platforms leverage on that kind of reach?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. Fortunately, we're in a country where we like free things, so it's free. You don't need to pay for anything yet. And so that platform is there for you to take advantage of. The other thing that is a situation we have in Nigeria, and with sports organizations, I think what he mentioned about that fluidity and that nimbleness and that experience is the fact that as much as you have those opportunities on those platforms, we need to be flexible enough to be patient on those platforms to understand how they'll be able to serve the purposes that we want them to serve. And so, being a broadcaster, we get into some of those platforms, the whole idea is that, we need to start hitting XYZ views, we need to start having XYZ fans. It's not gonna happen like that. It means you will take a little bit more time, a little bit more patient. You will fail, you will make mistakes, you will learn, you will have the die-hard ones that will stick with you, but you need to be adaptable to that. So for me, for sports organizations, knowing that if it's not the ones that are built by young creators, if it is the brick and mortar sort of sports organizations, the first thing that they need to understand is they need to be open-minded to the fluidity and changes that comes with these platforms. You're always going to have to adapt different strategies for different platforms. There also has to be the willingness to collaborate. I do know of certain sports organizations on certain platforms. What they do is they've got the platform, but they don't quite have the ability and the reach to the audiences they want to garner on those platforms. So what they do is they collaborate with content creators, whether they're young content creators, whether those creators have a particular niche that they want to get into. So sometimes some of these organizations use those content creators as the face of that thing that they're trying to do. What then happens is that you've got the structure, they've got the reach. So it's a marriage that ends up working at the end of the day. So some of the things, the first two things, is just the fact that it's free. You have to be open-minded to the changes and strategies you need to adapt on different platforms. You need to be able to be open to collaborations. And where you need to actually make and have spend, there needs to be openness to doing that. And understanding, like every business, it's an investment. It's not going to reap, or it's not going to yield what you need it to yield in the short term, but more mid-term and long-term it does. Because for me, as a personal example, when I started doing women's football, I was probably one of the very few women in Africa doing that, and there was no end in sight. Boy, I was hungry. Like, there was nothing coming out from there. Now that I'm getting my flowers in women's football, I feel like a fraud, because I'm like, there's so many people who are working so hard now, but then people weren't on that people didn't see those opportunities. I did. So you need to stay the course. You need to be patient. And I had to be patient. I had to be open-minded. I had to collaborate a lot with other people that had the strength and the reach that I wanted to get into. And over time, as long as you have that structure and you stay by it and you're flexible and amenable to change, you are going to be one of the pioneers or one of the people leading that charge. And, you know, the world becomes your oyster from then on.
Nice. Interesting. I hope we are learning as much as I am. So I'll take it straight to Debbie. There's also something he mentioned about traditional media, which affects what you do. For people like us, from childhood, we've always consumed sports through traditional media, television, radio, newspapers. Those are what we are used to up until a couple of years ago. So for you, for an organization like Brilla that has been there from time, what learnings can we take from traditional media that can be implemented on these newer platforms that can advance the conversation and shed more light on sports media and sports in general?
Okay. I think for me, number one is that the new media has to do their research on why Nigerians still pick, so in the Nigerian context, the number one chosen platform to still get news and content is radio. And so there's a reason why. Structure. You know, when you look at traditional media houses, most of them have existed for years. They did not just come, you know, how do you say that thing? They did not just arrive here, you know. And so there has to be structure. For a lot of new media organizations that I see, there's no structure, so there's no succession planning, because what they have now is very fragile. You can't build on it. You know, I don't want to say people are operating on vibes, but that's what it is. There's no goal, no vision. So, and I'll give Brilla as a case study here. We're a niche radio station, a niche media house, just sports. Now, that means that even if sports in Nigeria is dying, we are stuck with sports. With a lot of new media organizations, what happens is that there's dilly-dallying into many things because let me make quick cash. And if you do that, your business will not be sustainable. I mean, there are many things that I can explain, but I think number one is having a plan and sticking to that plan, because that's what a lot of media houses do. If I call many media houses now, once I mention the name, there's something that comes to mind. But when you call some new digital media houses or digital agencies, many things come to mind. And so you have to define your USP before you can even, you know, argue with the big boys.
Okay, interesting. So Maxwell, you run a unique platform. It's unique because before now, not everybody was shedding light on that art form. I'll call it an art form because I'm a fan of martial arts. So what media methods are you using to grow African Wrestling Fighting Championship?
African Warriors.
African Warriors Fighting Championship.
The key thing is storytelling. Our key sport is Dambe, traditional Hausa boxing. This isn't football, this isn't boxing, this isn't MMA. This is a sport that goes back thousands of years. I'm not sure if you've watched Dambe. If you haven't, make sure you check us out. But in the sport, fighters wrap one hand with rope. They use that for punching. The other hand is unwrapped. That's used for blocking. The wrapped hand is called the spear. The unblocked hand is called the shield. A knockdown or a knockout is called a kill. All of these terms go back to warfare because this is the roots of this sport. This is how Hausa warriors used to prepare for warfare. And it very much, this isn't just a sport, as I say, this is organized warfare that we're now being able to watch in the 21st century. And this storytelling extends to our fighters. Let me tell you a story of Abdullahi. Abdullahi is 25. The second child of 11, grew up in a village outside Kano in a mud house. His mom is about 44, 11 kids. If Abdullahi did well by our current Nigerian standards, he'd be a gate man. He'd be a security guy, maybe he'd be pushing a wheelbarrow. That's if he did well. If he did bad, he could be a bandit, he could be Boko Haram. He's none of those things. Abdullahi is a fighter. He's not just a fighter, he's a champion. When he fights, he doesn't go by Abdullahi, he goes by coronavirus. He goes by coronavirus because he's deadly, a warrior, one of my favorite fighters personally. So for me, central to growing African warriors and what we've been doing so far is telling these stories. Telling the proud historic story of the sport of Dambe 1, and then telling the deep stories of the fighters. Fighters that are coming from the most impoverished part of the poverty center of the world. Fighters that, when they're stepping on the sand, when they're fighting, it's not just because, you know, they want the adulation, they want the crowd. They're literally fighting for their lives. And we, with what we're doing, is giving them a platform to provide for their families, hopefully to become superstars. So going back to your question, the key thing, more than anything, is storytelling. It's using different platforms. We have TikTok over here. It's partnering with different partners to just promote these stories, push them as far as wide.
Thank you, thank you. What he just talked about brings us to, because if you realize what's been happening here, a lot of these efforts are private sector driven efforts. And I know our speaker here, Biola, has some connections with the Lagos State government. So I'd like to know what initiatives or how the public sector or government organizations can work together to partner with private organizations to push sports, especially using media. I've seen recently, I see the Lagos State government trying to involve itself in quite a number of events. There was the Kamaru Usman event that was also held here. I saw the Lagos State sports administrator. He was there. There was also several events like that. So I want to know what avenues you think are available for government and private sector to partner to push sports.
I mean, I think that the first thing to know is that the role of government in all of this is quite limited. Limited in the sense that it's fundamentally an opportunity for entrepreneurs, you know, and business people in quotes to take over. What government can do and what governments do all over the world in terms of sports is, one, focus on development, and then two, focus on where possible facilities. In terms of now what people build on it, so I'll give you a simple example with what Maxwell is doing with African Warriors Championship, right? There isn't anything really that government can do in there. More than, so for instance, if they needed better facilities and they don't have the money to invest in that, you can provide access if, you know, like I said, where possible. Sometimes as well, so I give you something like the Lagos Marathon. That is a perfect example of where government can come in. So for instance, you have to shut down the whole of Lagos for 6 hours. If you want to do the marathon, government has to work with you on that. But in terms of maximizing the commercial opportunity in there, that is for somebody to think up, bring to government, and government can see the opportunities, the social and economic opportunities for government in there, and then they provide all of the support with, you know, the government agencies that you need. To do the marathon, you need the police, you need LASMA, you need VIO, you are going to need medical facilities. There's literally like, 20 ambulances, you know, going around near the runners. You literally have to shut Lagos down for 6 hours. You need government in that. But what I would say is that the role of government all over the world in terms of maximizing the opportunity is limited. You go back to the EPL. The EPL, as we know it, started in 1993. Prior to that, football in England was strongly tied to government. And then this opportunity came. Sky provided, I think, about £80 million to EPL clubs. What the clubs did was they took that money, refurbished the stadiums. In refurbishing the stadium, they basically appealed to a new generation of fans. Prior to that, it used to be thugs and yobs and all sorts of people. English football was associated with violence and the worst of British society. We still see vestiges of it. But like I said to people, if you want to watch a Manchester United match as a walking fan, you're probably spending £200. If you're going to spend £200 to watch a game in England, you're probably not a thug, right? So just with that, they have already attracted a whole new generation, of fans. And because of that Sky money, EPL exploded. It's £1 billion, entity right now. And actually, the EPL pays taxes, lots of taxes, to government. I was reading a stat where 3 out of every 10 people that visit England go to an EPL stadium. This is the impact that sport can actually have on government and society rather than government having on sport. So the real opportunity exists with private people going into sport, maximizing opportunity like what Maxwell is trying to do. And then if you have pockets of all of these all around the place, people are participating, people are watching, people are paying money, government is providing facilities. That is the symbiosis that can exist. It's not a problem really for government alone to solve.
I'm learning. I hope other people are learning as much as I am. So he mentioned something about catering to a new generation like of an audience, right? So I'm throwing that question to Debbie. Let me use myself as an example, right? So growing up or earlier on, I used to be a very strong radio fan. But as time continued to evolve, I drifted away from radio. So I'm sure I'm not the only person that feels this way, especially those that are born in a generation that is not radio fixated like mine was. So I'll ask, how are we trying to make those kind of platforms like radio more appealing to a younger generation of fans?
I love this question because I think even if you look at my story, right? So I was running a digital agency before I started working full-time in Brilla. So for me, it was such a huge shift to move from digital to traditional media or ways of communicating with an audience. And one thing I realized is that with traditional media, you have to keep it short. So gone are the days where you would just be on radio talking 1 hour, like what is happening? So now what we try to do with traditional media, especially with Brilla, is that we ensure that even if we're going to have maybe analysis for a long time, we're communicating with the audience. So you're giving the audience a chance to shine. So you open your phone lines. It's not about you. We always tell our OAPs, you're fantastic. We love your analysis. We love your knowledge. But the fans want to hear themselves. And so it's like almost, it's not replicating social media, but it's almost like giving a room for other people to shine. I think also not being big-headed where you're not listening to like collaborations, right? So you're not listening to digital media because people will leave you behind if you're not doing your research or improving on your equipment. When I joined Brilla Media 5 years ago, we were just Brilla FM. My first task was ensuring that we transitioned from FM to media. It meant including Brilla.net, which now is just only for a global audience. Nigerians don't even really read it because they're not our target market. It also meant creating a visual appeal because I realized then, it's not that podcast is even popular. When we brought this, it was just starting off. So my thought process then was, how can we get the audience to see what is happening in the studio? So it's not radio as usual. So when you tune into the Brilla app, what you're seeing is you're seeing everything that's happening in the studio. That way we're leveraging on technology. It's the same thing, and I want to give an example outside of Brilla, even though, I eat, sleep Brilla. If you think of the EPL, when they started realizing that fans wanted to be involved, they created a special camera for fans' reaction. So if you're not a traditional media, if you don't make it about the fans, you will lose your fans. And so I think for me, maybe that's it.
Okay, interesting. Still on that same topic, Janine, talking about the younger generation, right? From your experience, what kind of content, what kind of sports content do you think is appealing to them? What kind of sports content do they consume on an average?
COVID was special. I mean, God forbid, it wasn't that special, but it was interesting because what happened was when people stayed at home, they're like, you know what are we going to do at home? How about we do watch-alongs? So it rose to a space where people would sit down in their homes, put a camera, go live, and do watch-alongs, watching a football game or going through a boxing commentary, and people could connect to that, type comments, or literally live vicariously through whatever you're doing. And so that is such a hit, across young audiences, where it's the live reactions. They want to know how animated you are. They want to also get you to feel how they're feeling at the same time. So it creates a sense of community. And I think, as we've said, the world it's a global village and it's just being condensed to just one small place. That's exactly what sports is doing now. Like, I will be doing the watch along in South Africa and someone in Mauritius joining in on that and just, making comments or even saying this is what's happening in my neighborhood at the same time. So it's really condensed the space to be very communal. So it's one of the big hits with young audiences. Another big hit with young audiences are non-sports related content by sports athletes. I know on TV then it used to be Hot Cake, where you'd have like a special show that was dedicated to lifestyle. It almost felt like you have to, if you blink, you miss it. Now, like if you didn't join at 7:30 p.m., join next week Sunday at 7:30 p.m. and something else. But now people want to know exactly what you're doing beyond football. I give an example. Recently, there was an award by one of the biggest social media brands, and the creator who won the Creator of the Year was actually a former rugby player. And what the person just did was always cooking and just talking about that and cooking, and people just got hooked and connected to that. So how can you communicate beyond? How can they see you beyond your regalia and your costume? How can they humanize what you're doing and feel connected to that? What kind of food as a rugby player are you making that makes you excel at what you're doing? Whatever. Just that sort of creative space is also important. And another just the final content around what people are really consuming lately, like young creators, are like women's sports as well. Women's sports is becoming really, really mainstream because now you're seeing, for instance, in England, you have like Arsenal fans, when they watch their men's team, you literally see side by side, the women's team just won a game, and people are beginning to talk about like, what's that about, how did they perform, and all of those things. Women's sports, watch-alongs, more sports lifestyle content is becoming a really big hit. And like Debbie says, as long as people are being able to comment, they're being engaged with that, there's just so much more that you can do. And one thing I always advise people is, yes, I know football is what it is, it's big. There's so many other sports that you can explore. There's from cricket to dambe, so many other sports that you can actually create your niche and you be the go-to person in that. You have time to make mistakes, figure it out, and excel at it. And, there's no limit to what young people want to consume. They can consume everything and anything. As long as you make them feel engaged, happy, you evoke some sort of emotion from and in them, you're good to go.
I wanted to ask a question, but while you are answering that question, you already answered the question. So let's just move on, because I wanted to ask what kind of content are young people consuming, but you've already answered the question, the lifestyle, more women, more out of the pitch content that brings them closer to the lifestyle of the artist. Thank you. So Maxwell, like I've said earlier on, I'm a big fan of martial arts, so I always ask you questions that yeah. So what challenges have you faced? Is a two-headed question. So one, what challenges have you faced in marketing a niche sports like dambe to the Nigerian audience that, like she rightly mentioned, is quite fixated on football? We might have basketball fans here, we might have maybe people that follow flag football and some other sports. But what have you faced? What challenges have you faced in marketing that kind of brand to a Nigerian audience? And also, Because I know I follow, there's also another page I follow on social media, FBL, it's a global, like all they post is fighting, different kind of fighting sport. And I've seen several collaborations with your brand. So what challenges have you also faced in marketing a Nigerian brand to that kind of global audience? Because I'm sure they are used to different kind of martial arts that is very different from what you're offering.
Yeah, that's a great question. You're laughing. So I think starting with Nigeria. So I didn't grow up in Nigeria. I'm Igbo from the southeast, from Abia State. But I've dedicated my life to promoting a northern sport. And the reason I did that is because I started before anything, I'm a fan. Before anything, before founder, before CEO, I'm a fan of this sport. And I saw Dambe for the first time, and I said, this thing needs to be promoted more. It needs to be bigger at home, it needs to be bigger abroad. I've always been a combat sports fan in particular, and that was enough for me. I think when you're talking about the biggest challenge in Nigeria is that enough isn't enough for the average Nigerian. Nigeria is split by tribal, regional, religious, all of these different lines. So I think in marketing this sport, the first thing is can be a bit of a resistance in terms of, what's this northern thing that you're pushing? And I'm like, look, if it could convince me, it should be able to convince you. And slowly but surely, we're definitely seeing that. Then I think on a global level, so I'm going to say something bold here. So anybody from the worlds of football, basketball, let me know what you think. I already think in very limited time, with the limited budget that we've been doing this, that Dambe is Africa's biggest sporting success story. Dambe is Africa's biggest sporting export. And the reason I say that is because there's a relevance we have that would challenge any other sport to give me. And I say that because one thing I noticed on our TikTok actually is I kept on seeing Portuguese comments, Brazilian flags, like just people in our comments. And I was asking the social media team, I was like, what's this about? I was like, do some digging, let's work out what's going on here. And it turns out that our biggest group of followers on TikTok is from Brazil. We've never done any Portuguese language content. We've never done any promotion into Brazil. But these people, just as huge combat sports fans, have seen our stuff and have got behind it. And that's very much, we see that across our output. Our biggest sort of following, our biggest fan bases are Brazil, the United States, and increasingly Thailand. All of these countries are countries that have a culture of combat sports. Brazil was the home of MMA. The USA, boxing, MMA. Thailand, Muay Thai. So we've seen that already. We're able to really reach people, again, through this storytelling piece. And there've been levels to it. Because when we first started, it was people just need to see knockouts. As you know, people online have very short attention spans. So it's like, what can we just give them that will just, one guy will watch it, be like, guy, you need to see this, send it to 2 of his friends. That's all I needed. And luckily we got that. We have amazing athletes who are putting on the line every single time. So Nigeria is a very different beast. And you need to give Nigerians respect in terms of, to crack Nigeria, you need to have a distinct strategy. And we're getting there. We're really permeating. We've shown that, sadly, I think Nigeria responds very well when they see people outside of Nigeria interested in your thing. So I'd be sending African Warrior stuff to my friends, to my aunties, to my uncles. They wouldn't say anything. I would then get a phone call, Maxwell, I saw you on CNN. I'm like, well, that's what I've been doing now. So it's just, ultimately for Nigeria, it's showing why you need to be proud of this, why this is exciting. I mean, we're all angry here anyway, so you can get behind combat sports. Then on an international level, it's just building on what we're doing. It's increasing standards, it's increasing production. What we've seen, and I think it's a very interesting thing, again, this is a Nigeria versus a global thing as well, in that local is a bad word in Nigeria. This sport is local, it's a grassroots sport. People fight on sand, not wearing shoes. And on an international level, that excites them. It's different. It's not the shiny EPL. It's not Anthony Joshua fighting in front of 60,000 people in Wembley. It's raw. And people like that. And then on top of that, you have the culture. You have singers who are singing these songs in Hausa, which are gingering these fighters. You have fighters who are wearing charms. which one old man from Sokoto brought for him so he could win that fight. So all of these things, people are watching that and they love it. And we're seeing people engaging with it. And I sometimes have this conversation where people are like, you need to package this thing, man. You need to do this. I'm like, look, if you want to go and watch WWE, go and watch WWE. If you want to go and watch boxing, go and watch boxing. My goal is taking this sport global. And of course, we need to improve standards. We need to be innovative about this sport. But at the same time, we need to keep it unique to what it makes, what makes it Dambe. And we've seen that in a limited time, limited budget, limited team, we've been able to push that by really just focusing on that.
Nice. I'm looking forward to see Dambe grow more. Let's take the conversation back to some other learnings. So Biola, I don't know, let me throw this to you. Looking at sports as it is now, what learning opportunities are there for organizations to say, okay, yeah, we've gotten to this level, but we want to push sports media further than it is? What opportunities exist?
I mean, opportunities are always limitless. So you've got to constantly, as an organization, be curious as to, what's next. I think that the big challenge for all platforms, traditional, digital, is that Africa and Nigeria particularly has a very young population. Young people by nature are very, very shifty. And so even though you want to build a sustainable business, like the point Debbie made, your sustainability is built in your ability as well to be flexible to respond to the yearnings, so to speak, of an ever-changing, audience. The example that I use for a lot of people is like, you look at all of these keep makers, that we watch. They evolve every year. The guys who are watching last year are not the guys who are watching this year. They are speaking to this audience that we speak about that is very, very restless. They are constantly on the edge for what's new. In terms of the sport itself, I think that sports, the global sports, the big sport, they will stay the way they are. But I think that the format will continue to evolve. So, for instance, we speak about short attention span. We've already started picking up conversations at the highest level of football about sort of like just changing the format of football to cater to this need. Right now, it's 45 minutes, 2 halves. Keeping people focused across the world for 90 minutes is becoming a challenge. So football will be football, but the format will change because of this thing that we speak about. So American sports typically don't have this challenge because every 30 seconds or 20 seconds, somebody is scoring a goal either in a basket or, But if you look at the NFL, for instance, it's starting to lose a new generation of fans because like football, soccer, so to speak, it's drawn out. You could go 10 minutes and there's no touchdown. There are so many stops in there. So I think that what will change is that format of sports and the way they are reported will keep changing. So the biggest fighting platforms in terms of views, for instance, are the highlight platforms. Because people don't want to, UFC, for instance, is 5. I don't know, how many minutes is Dambe, how many rounds?
Maximum 9 minutes for a whole fight.
For a whole fight.
3-minute rounds.
Exactly. So UFC, for instance, is 5 minutes, 5 rounds, for the main event. It's a long time as far as young people are concerned. They rather miss that, wake up the next day, and just go and watch the highlights. And so these are the things. So I think that the format of sports, as we know it, will continue to evolve. You will have to cater to this need eventually, whether you like it or not. Sports will remain the spectacular it is. People will always want to engage. But like I said, as the demographics and psychographics continue to shift under us to be sustainable as in sports media and as sports organizations, you will have to cater to those needs.
Thank you. It seems we have some prophetic speakers here because they end up answering my next question. Yeah, because I wanted to ask what needs to change for us to get there, but you've already mentioned a couple of things that need to change. Still on that subject, Janine, looking at sports media internationally and what is obtainable here in Nigeria, what are the key differences between what is obtainable outside Nigeria and what we have here, and what quick wins can we do to catch up with what is happening outside Nigeria?
That's a really good question. I think we need to diversify from football being our Lord and Savior. There are a number of sports. We have nougat games, for instance, where you have a plethora of sports, right? We need to start tapping into different sectors because what happens is we're losing talents that we're not spotting to different sports because we're just focused on certain niche sports. And there are many more opportunities. Sometimes you watch things like the Paralympics or whatever, and then you see those kind of different sports that are giving Nigeria glory. When you see it internationally, there's a focus on different facets of sports, from cricket to rugby. And like he mentioned, things around, local sport that we don't like to look at. There's opportunities in there to really diversify attention into those sports, whether it's a local ping pong or tennis, whether it is board games, all those kind of things. So what happens internationally or globally is that they find those markets and they invest in those markets to have their following. So there's a cult group across different sports. You are never going to run out of content. You're never going to run out of fans. You're always going to keep being refreshed in that. So I think it's something that I think for us, we can start looking at to just go beyond like the big sports. They will stand the test of time. But what happens is then we begin to lose talent that could have naturally suited to other sports because they're not going to get the talent, the investment, the support from our families, because they're going to like, sorry, what do you want to do? Dambe, what is that? We need to make sure as media that we can have that focus. I struggled a lot when I started in women's football, where they're like, what are you doing? Like, what is the point? And now I hear comments about when they say, well, that women's football match, people like say it's sweet past that men's game. Do you understand? So it's because media across the world, they decided to focus on those kind of content and those kind of sports to ensure that they have a massive reach. So I think that's something that we definitely need to touch on.
Yeah, Biola.
Yeah, just to add to what Jane is saying, I think that the primary challenge for all of us in sports media, fundamentally, which touches on what Maxwell has said, is that we don't tell good enough stories, and that's just the truth. So before we talk about new sports, let's talk about maximizing, for instance, the football that we say we all love. There's the MPFL. The way the MPFL is reported, I'm sorry to say, it's so abysmal. There's no drama. The most popular people in the MPFL are the administrators. There's no storytelling. So, for instance, the way sports is built all across the world is on fundamentally rivalry and tribalism, right? We have vestiges of this in the local league. Enugu Rangers, Shooting Stars, sometimes intercity derbies. These stories are not well told. So, for instance, in fighting, where you have derbies in fighting, what you have is I would say, rivalry, where, for instance, the most popular boxing rivalry ever is Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, is a trilogy. In MMA as well, we've started seeing the emergence of trilogy in terms of the fact that people connect to rivalry, people connect to tribalism, and we don't tell these stories. I say to people that the MPFL is not even visual. You don't watch it on TV. You hear a player has scored 17 goals. There are no clips of these goals. Nobody knows these players' faces. You go to stadia across Nigeria. Okay, MPFL is not on TV. What about you do banners of your superstar players and you put them all around? So that just by coming near this stadium and I see these players this guy is a superstar. This guy is a superstar. That's how sports is driven. It's driven by people knowing. So the most popular sports platforms, there's a correlation between the most popular sports platforms and people knowing the people that are coming to play. That's with that essence of familiarity. Oh, I'm watching NBA, LA Lakers, LeBron James, Anthony. You have to know the people that are coming to watch. So before we even start looking for new sport, I'm saying that the opportunities that exist, we've not done a good enough job in maximizing the storytelling and narrative spinning opportunities to build up this sport to a point where we can now start looking for new opportunities.
And just to add to that, I was on a similar panel a few months ago in Egypt. This is how I sat on that panel. And then there were Alakli fans, Zamalek fans, and then they kept asking me questions around like, oh, what do we need to ensure that we're peaceful? And I would say, oh, we need to make sure that I was speaking English. And then the Zamalek fan was saying, no, we need to do X, Y, Z, the other. So everything I kept saying was like, I was trying to bring peace to the panel, but both of them were not having it.
I'll tell you something. The primary identifier of anybody in Cairo is what club you support.
Yes.
You enter a taxi cab, the guy goes, my name is Hamid. I'm an Al-Hagli fan. Yes. That's next thing that's going to say, oh, my name is so. I support Zamalek. You will see it either in something in his taxi, the jersey is wearing, or where you're having conversations around football. Within 3 seconds, it's going to mention the club, that I support. This is what we are talking about connecting people. Only if, I think that Ibadan, for instance, there's still a deep connection to Shooting Stars. But I think that is also dying because the last of the 30s and 40s obviously are going to get older. The younger generation, if you don't tell these stories, so there's something that Brighton FC did, right? They are playing really well now. People are connecting to them.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. So let me start with you, Maxwell. I'm a fan of combat sports, probably almost all the sports. Russia and Eastern Europe has Sambo, Brazil has BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Mexico, Lucha Libre, Muay Thai is in Thailand, USA, Japan, they basically do everything, kickboxing, prize fighting, pro wrestling, wrestle, everything. They basically do everything. And then in Nigeria, you're doing Dambe. And we also have lots of other African sports, African combat sports, not just necessarily Dambe. Dambe is also in the north. It's also in Senegal as well. It's also in Niger. There's also the Igbo traditional wrestling. I'm from the east, so of course I'll also resonate with my people as well. There's also the Igbo traditional wrestling as well. So how are you what are you doing to position Dambe, not just to make it synonymous to Nigeria, but to make it synonymous to Africa as a whole? Also bearing in mind that there are other forms of combat sports in the continent and in Nigeria as well.
That's a good question. So we are African Warriors Fighting Championship, not Nigerian Warriors Fighting Championship, not Hausa Warriors Fighting Championship. And that's for a reason in that we're building a Pan-African platform for raising the bar when it comes to combat sports. We started with Dambe as an exciting sport, a new sport, a fresh sport, but we very much see African Warriors being a home for multiple combat sports. We've done some events featuring wrestling, for example. So for me, in terms of where we are now, it's a starting point. You mentioned all of the sports that are synonymous with other countries. And that's how we see this. Africa needs its own martial art that can stand next to Chinese people on Kung Fu, can stand next to Brazilian people on Jiu-Jitsu. So we just started with Dambe, but we're scratching the surface. And we see ourselves being an umbrella organization for all of the continent's combat sports.
Okay, I don't know if we have...
All right, thank you very much. I have two questions here. The first one is, I'll direct it to Jane. I'm a lover of table tennis, and I followed table tennis very well. I report table tennis. And this question is, you said we should divert to other sports. Now, what are the challenges, and how do we face these challenges? Then the second question is about the local league to Biola. You said most of the Nigerian media are not reporting the subject rather than they are reporting the administrators. I have been to several stadiums in Nigeria reporting Nigerian league. And the main problem we face, or I face particularly, is players are not ready to talk. Even there are cases that they don't understand English. Okay, let's speak Yoruba, even if it is Igbo or Hausa, we'll find a translator. They themselves, they are not ready to sell themselves. They will tell you, go and meet my coach, go and meet my CEO or this or that. What are we going to do to stop this and to tell the stories of these players? Thank you.
I mean, with regards to the question about the players not wanting to talk, I mean, I completely understand, and you are completely right, because it's an experience I've had myself. I think that fundamentally what has to change is the general culture around the league. So the club owners, they call themselves, or the club CEOs, basically don't have to make money, right? Somebody releases money to them and they spend money on these players, on their campaigns across the season. When it becomes critical that you need to make your own money, then you realize how important it is that, I mean, for the media, obviously, to cover your players and speak to your players, and then the culture starts to change in the sense that generally players don't like to talk to the media all across the world. So sometimes you are standing in the mix zone, maybe 22 players are going to file out. If you're lucky, 4 or 5, will stop. But if a big media platform writes to a club, sometimes even small media platform writes to a club and say, I want to interview this player. So I've interviewed Nigerian players, all across the world. If you write to the club enough, make a compelling case, they will say to the player that somebody's coming here on Thursday at 10 a.m. to interview you. You are not necessarily commanding the player, but you are making it clear to the player that's part of your duties. You have some duties to the media, and they will make that player available. And you guys, you have your 30 minutes, to speak. So it will come directly from the culture of the league and the clubs themselves to understand that they need the media, to build their players into stars. And when you have stars, more and more people will come and watch. The TV experience will be richer for people who want to watch from home. And then ultimately, you start to make money from TV broadcast and people buying merchandise. There's no way all of these things are going to happen if you don't build the players into stars. The game at the top level. It's about superstars, and that's just all there is to it. Clubs die to get superstars in because once you get them in, there's a correlation between. So our Nasser, they had what, 800,000 followers on Instagram before they signed Ronaldo. In 3 days, they were up to 10 million. Jerseys were flying. This is what happens when you get in stars, and that eventually is what has to happen here if you want to build a local league that's vibrant and that people connect to and engage with.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I want you to give me the microphone.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what you and I are going to do, we're going to create a table tennis show, right? Because you're asking what the challenges are in if you wanted to do something around table tennis, right? Because you love the sport, what do you think are the problems you face? So I'm asking you that question so that we can create something around it.
Here in Nigeria, we don't have enough facilities. Although we have local facilities, table and little bats that we do play. If you go around the street, you see them. But professionally, we don't have enough equipment.
So is your question around content creation, or is your question around how to make people interested in table tennis as a sport?
Yes.
So tell me about table tennis. Like, what is it about it to me that I mean, I don't know anything about. What do you think is amazing about table tennis?
Yeah, table tennis is the second most followed sport in the world, and it is a sport that makes you travel across the globe. Aruna Kodri traveled to South Africa, Durban, and Qatar, and now in Russia within 2 months. There is no other sport that can give you that leverage to go across the globe and play a sport that gives you nothing less than a few points in less than an hour.
Okay, so what you're basically telling me, you're basically selling the sport to me that it has, you know, financial implications for people. Like they profit from it. You're able to travel. Then you can actually do a historical storytelling around table tennis. So you could say, you know, you could create a show to be like here's the 5 things you need to know about the most traveled African table tennis star. Yeah. Then I'm interested. I'm like, really? There's somebody like that? Or you can actually get something. Maybe you can actually buy a table tennis racket or ball, and you can unbox it to say, you know, this is how you unbox it, or this is how you do your first. There's always something to tell around a sport for people to get engaged in it. You know, so you need to be creative. Now that you realize that there's a challenge of non-storytelling, because that's what you asked, Biola. I don't know anybody. I don't know anything that's happening around the sport. So you come into that space and you fill that gap. What are the 5 biggest myths about table tennis? Who are the 5 biggest stars around table tennis? Who are the you know, where are the places in Lagos that you can find the best table tennis players? Number 1, Ali Mosho, blah 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 blah. Number 2, Ikorodu. So many things, and then people begin to be like, you know. Those kind of gaps that you can fill only when you decide to expand that horizon and make the sport what you want people to consume it as.
Thank you. The organizers might arrest me if I continue, but I'll risk it. He has been raising his hand up for the longest time. So he will just... I'm very sorry.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm a football content provider. So how could I possibly collaborate with Paul Sports? Thank you.
Shoot your shots.
Sharp guy. It's pretty easy. Send a mail to sports@pauls.ng, or after this session, just call in my number. Final words. I'll just give you guys 1 minute to just go through it. Where do you see sports media in Africa going in the next 10 years? And how can we... Like, how do we position ourselves and look towards the future of sports media in Africa? Just a minute for each person.
I think the future is bright. I think we're going global. As I mentioned, there's this African sort of cultural value that we've never seen it before. And I think sport needs to make sure that it's positioning itself next to Nollywood, next to Afrobeat, and riding that wave too. I think we're seeing so much more in terms of homegrown creators coming out of the continent. We've partnered with some of them, and it's exciting to see uniquely African, uniquely Nigerian voices exploring sports, discussing sports. So I think let's just continue. I think the sky's the limit. We are the global home when it comes to sporting talent. And I think as we continue to grow, as the population continues to grow, we'll continue to become more and more relevant on the global stage when it comes to sports.
So I think the media will continue to do its job. So the future is bright for the media, but I think that the administrators in sports in Nigeria need to be held accountable so that when we tell stories, we have positive things to share. Even when you talk about the MPFL, the truth is, what is on the field is what you would showcase, right? So for me, if I think of sports in the next couple of years, I'm hoping that we would have administrators that also have passion for sports, not just politicians, people that care deeply about sports, because that's the only way that sports will grow. And for us, it's like entertainment. You know, you can showcase Davido terms because the talent is there. There's good partners, administrators that are putting them on the global scene. But if you look at the Super Eagles, if you look at, you know, just, I don't want to call names, there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm hoping that they will do the right thing so that we can tell the right stories.
Thank you.
For me, I'm so excited about the future because just the number of creators and creatives I work with and I know that are just creating sports from their living room, from their kitchen, from their bathroom is just amazing. And I also look forward to your table tennis content, your show, because all of these ideas that young people are thinking about and putting it together to just showcase their talent and just showcase what they can do and how creative they can be. I can imagine people coming together, collaborating, doing partnerships. I know that your company, for instance, is probably running on a couple of people coming together and saying, you know what, we can do this. That's exactly what I see the future of young creatives coming together and saying, you know what, we can create this, we can do this, we can get our words out there. And I do believe, like you said, if the administrators and the sports get itself together, the conduit, the ecosystem will thrive. So there is administrators doing their thing, there's the structured ones, and then there are the content creators who will find ways to unearth the germs. And I'm so excited for that 10 years, 20 years from now.
I like the optimism. Biola.
Well, I think that the challenge before us is to realize that the African audience is not particularly starving for sports content, right? If you don't give them the MPFL, they will gladly watch the EPL or the La Liga and all of the other sports, content that they can watch. So the challenge for us is to look at what these guys are enjoying and not necessarily replicate it, because like Matthew said, local can be good, but you've got to tell stories. You've got to connect them back to their... Nothing sells like a good old connect to your root story, but you have to tell it in a really, really good way. You are reporting the MPFL, humanize the players, right? Report them as superstars, as human beings. Talk about the challenges. You are covering basketball, local tennis. Just connect people to stories and narratives, and they will, naturally start to, follow this sport. Look, over the past 20 years, the UFC, for instance, has quickly become one of the most popular sports. It wasn't existing really. In 20 years, the opportunity exists. There are 2 billion people in Africa. Even if you have a captive audience of only 10% of that is 200 million. 200 million is a lot. So the challenge is there, the opportunity is there. It's our job to take it.
Thank you. We've officially come to the end of the session. Somebody wants to stone me from across the hall. So yeah, thanks for this session. I had a very nice time with my guests, panelists. Very enlightening conversation, and I look forward to more partnerships. We've been directed to pose for photo ops. Thank you. I always tell my people, thanks for banking with us. I like money. Bye.
Solo credit card.